I was 47 when I found the box. Inside, beneath a notarized partnership agreement I never knew existed, my dead husband had written 3 words that would dismantle my stepson's $1 million betrayal. Do not trust Peter. That warning led me to uncover a forged release, void a $1.2 million vineyard sale, and eventually rename the property Grapes of Wrath while Peter prunes the vines in a shirt that says crushed by justice. Every bottle sold now funds a watchdog that roots out notary fraud, but it all started with a death and a dusty lockbox. My name isn't important to this story. I was a title examiner at the Sonoma County Recorder's Office for 23 years, the kind of woman who could glance at a notary stamp and tell you the commission expiration year by the font alone. I spent my days in the basement records vault, cross-referencing grantor grantee indices, catching clouded chains of title before they became lawsuits. I retired early, at 46, to care for my husband Ben during his final 14 months with pancreatic cancer. Ben was a vineyard soil analyst, a quiet man who read geological survey, maps the way other men read the sports page. He taught me to use a tension wrench on old gate locks when I'd survey abandoned parcels for the county, a skill I didn't expect to need again. When he died on a foggy November morning, I sat with his body for 2 hours before calling anyone, and I made myself a silent promise that I would not let his legacy be pillaged. Ben's son from his first marriage, Peter, was 31 and a winemaker with an uncanny nose for Zinfandel and a pathological inability to spend within his means. He'd inherited Redwood Hills Vineyard from Ben years ago, a 37-acre benchland plot in the Russian River Valley that should have been profitable. But Peter had mortgaged it twice and still threw catered release parties for vintages that hadn't sold out. His wife Tanya was a former marketing director for a Sonoma resort, a woman who understood that an Instagram grid of harvest sunsets and barrel toast selfies could fool investors into thinking a drowning business was thriving. I'd always sensed something hollow in their kindness, but Ben had loved Peter blindly, and I'd let that love stand. Ben's death triggered the plot within 24 hours. Peter and Tanya arrived at my door with a Pyrex dish of baked ziti and a black leather binder that Tanya said would help consolidate all the estate paperwork. They didn't cry much, but they moved through Ben's den with a frantic efficiency, pulling his soil composition notebooks off the shelves, running their fingers over his framed vineyard plat maps, asking if I'd seen his important financial documents. Peter kept repeating that the upcoming vintage would fix everything, that I shouldn't worry, that he'd handle the tedious legal side so I could grieve. I noticed he never once looked at Ben's armchair, the one where Ben had spent his last week watching the fog roll over the trellises. Instead, Peter was already mentally auctioning off the estate. They stayed for 2 straight days, cataloging everything with the cold precision of appraisers. On the second afternoon, while Peter and Tanya were sorting through Ben's closet, arguing in low tones about what might be worth consigning, I climbed a wobbly step stool in the corner of the den and pulled down a small wooden box from the highest shelf. It was the kind meant to hold fishing lures, its varnish crackled with age, the brass hinges tarnished green. Peter saw me cradling it and barely glanced inside. Old lure catalogs from the 70s. He never threw anything away. Toss it in the donation pile, Sarah. We've got a lot to clear. I nodded, my face a damp mask of grief, and set the box on top of the Goodwill stack. It felt heavier than it should, and I could feel the faint shift of paper inside. That night, after their rental car pulled out of the gravel drive and the headlights disappeared down the lane, I retrieved the box, locked myself in the bathroom, and thumbed open the brass clasp. There were no lure catalogs. There was a manila legal portfolio, worn but clean, the kind with an accordion spine. Inside lay the original notarized partnership agreement I'd signed 6 months before Ben died, the one that gave me 40% of Redwood Hills in exchange for my $210,000 life insurance investment, with Peter holding the other 60 and managing operations. The document bore my genuine signature next to Peter's, the county recorder's stamp crisp as a razor. Clipped to the front page was a torn sheet from a yellow legal pad, covered in Ben's tight, pained handwriting. It read, "Sarah, do not trust Peter. He's already tried to sell the vineyard without you. The original is your anchor. Keep it safe." The handwriting grew shakier toward the end, as if he'd written it during a wave of pain, and the final word was underscored 3 times. I remember the way the bathroom tiles felt cold through my jeans as I slid to the floor and read those words 7 times, my breath shallow, my eyes burning. My dead husband had handed me a weapon from the grave, a quiet little landmine that I didn't yet know how to trigger. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that some family trees need to be pruned, not watered. The manipulation started softly the next morning. Tanya, dressed in a dove-gray cashmere wrap and smelling of jasmine, sat me at the breakfast table with a cup of chamomile and a stack of documents she called a simple estate management agreement. She explained that Peter would handle all the vineyard's day-to-day operations and my personal finances, since I was clearly too distraught to think clearly. "We just want to take care of you, Sarah," she said, her voice a low purr, as she uncapped a Montblanc pen and nudged it toward my hand. I scanned the first page, and the title examiner in me recognized a durable power of attorney clause that would cede my voting rights in the partnership and give Peter the legal authority to encumber or sell any asset in my name. Beneath it, a second clause gave Peter the right to manage and dispose of any real property interests without further consent, which effectively handed him the keys to sell the entire vineyard and pocket the proceeds. I didn't flinch. I let my hand tremble, let a single tear drop onto the signature line, and whispered, "I can't. Not yet. I need to pray on it first." Peter, who was hovering near the window, shot Tanya a barely concealed smirk. They thought I was a broken, foggy widow who couldn't balance a checkbook. They didn't stop there. Over the next 3 days, Tanya presented me with a living trust certification that would make Peter the successor trustee of all my assets, a healthcare proxy that effectively let them make life or death decisions if they claimed I was incapacitated, and a stack of blank certification of trust forms for my retirement account. Each time, I played the fragile widow, asking to take the documents to my prayer group or my late husband's memory, and each time I locked them in my suitcase alongside Ben's lockbox, photographing every page with my phone. Within a week, they moved me into the guest cottage on the vineyard property, a 2-room casita draped in wisteria and crawling with silverfish. They said it was for my safety, so I wouldn't be rattling around alone in my own house. "We can't have you falling downstairs with no one to hear you," Tanya cooed, but her eyes flicked toward the main house's front door, toward the den where I'd found the box. I knew it was a cage, a way to monitor me and keep the original partnership agreement out of sight, but I packed Ben's lockbox in my suitcase, played the compliant invalid, and started watching. The undercover investigation took nearly 4 months, and it became the longest procedural exhale of my life. The cottage sat 50 yards from the main house, close enough that I could hear Peter and Tanya's conversations through the open windows when the wind was right. I began keeping a small spiral notebook hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of a gardening encyclopedia, and I logged everything. The financial red flags bloomed like algae in a stagnant pond. Within the first week, I heard Peter pacing near the koi pond, his voice tightening as he dodged a call from a credit officer at Wells Fargo. He'd hang up, curse, and 10 minutes later a refrigerated truck would pull up delivering a dozen cases of Veuve Clicquot for a cellar party that Saturday. Tanya booked a lifestyle photo shoot for a wine spectator spread, and I later saw the catering invoice pinned to the bulletin board in the mudroom. $9,400 for past hors d'oeuvres and a raw bar, paid with a post-dated check that I knew would bounce twice based on the frantic phone calls Peter made the following Monday to his business loan officer, his voice pitched low and panicked as he begged for a 60-day extension on a balloon payment. A second call, about 10 days later, came while I was ostensibly weeding the lavender border near the guest cottage. Peter was on the back deck, his phone on speaker, and he didn't realize I could hear every word. The voice on the other end was a corporate acquisitions manager from a firm I'd later identify as Corpus Vintners, a large conglomerate out of Delaware that had been gobbling up boutique Sonoma labels for their portfolio. "Look, Peter, we're ready to close at 1.2, but our title commitment is throwing a flag on some old memorandum from 2022, something about a mandatory consent party. We need that cleared before we can fund, and our attorney says it's got a notary seal tied to a woman named Sarah. Is she still in the picture? We can't have competing claims on the 40% stake." Peter's laugh was thin and brittle. "She's a fading daffodil in the guest house. We'll have her signature on a release before the end of the quarter. Just give me a few weeks to manage the paperwork. She won't even know what she signed. That night I wrote down every word verbatim, including the phrase, fading daffodil, and I knew the trap was already set. I needed more than overheard phone calls, and the house itself gave me a gift. Tanya, who was utterly helpless with anything mechanical, came banging on my cottage door one Tuesday afternoon, flustered because the silverware drawer in the main kitchen was jammed shut. Her personal chef had quit that morning after 4 unpaid checks, and she was attempting to set a table for an investor dinner herself. "Sarah, you're handy with old things. Can you just pop it open for me?" she said, her voice straining to sound patient. I grabbed a butter knife and a flathead screwdriver from my toolkit and followed her inside. The drawer was a heavy maple antique, its side-mounted runners packed with decades of wax and crusted olive oil. I wedged the butter knife along the right slide, felt the resistance, then used the screwdriver to gently lever the track until the drawer lurched forward. When I pulled it fully free to clean the gunk, the bottom panel shifted under my fingers. An antique drawer with a false bottom. I'd seen them before in estate surveys, often hiding jewelry or love letters. This one held a thick manila envelope, the kind with a string and button closure, stamped with the logo of a Napa legal services firm. Tanya was still fretting over place settings, so I slid the envelope into the waistband of my jeans beneath my cardigan and told her the trick for keeping the runners smooth was a little beeswax every spring. She never looked twice. That night, in the dark of my cottage with the blinds drawn, I slit the envelope with a paring knife and spread its contents across my kitchen table. Inside was the cornerstone of Peter's entire fraud. It was a 1-page notarized document titled Release of Partnership Interest, dated 2 weeks after Ben's death, and it purported to relinquish my entire 40% stake in Redwood Hills to Peter, effective immediately, for consideration of love and affection. My signature was forged across the bottom, a slightly too smooth replica that a title examiner could spot at 10 paces because the baseline slant was wrong, 5 degrees too steep, and the loop on the S was sharp as a needle instead of the soft swell I'd spent decades training myself to produce. The notary block listed a name, a commission number starting with NPA 22,477, and a seal that looked hasty. The ink was blurry, the serrated outer perimeter flattened on one side, as if the stamp had been pressed down twice. I held it up to a bare bulb and saw a faint pixelation along the edges, the hallmark of a digital image printed at low resolution. I knew it was fake before I even checked the prefix, because Napa County notary commissions in that year ran in a completely different numbering sequence. I'd memorized those prefixes during my years at the recorder's office. The real NPA prefix that year belonged to Lake County, not Napa, and the specific commission number felt familiar in a nagging way I'd need to research. I spent the next 3 days reconstructing the paper trail the way a forensic accountant might reconstruct a Ponzi scheme. Every morning, while Peter and Tanya drove to the tasting room, I walked half a mile to the Sonoma County Recorder's office in Santa Rosa. I'd retired from that building, but I still knew which side door the janitor left unlocked for the early staff, the one behind the recycling dumpster that didn't trigger the alarm until 8. I logged into the public access terminals using a guest pass, and I pulled the full grantor grantee index for the vineyard parcel, assessor's parcel number 087-210-035. The first thing I found made my throat tighten with a grief that was almost pride. 6 months before he died, Ben himself had walked into this same office and filed a document titled Memorandum of Partnership. He'd been a California notary for 15 years, a detail I'd always dismissed as a quirk, and he'd used his own commission to notarize the memorandum. It referenced our original partnership agreement, listed me by name as a mandatory consent party, and contained an explicit restrictive covenant. No conveyance, hypo the cation, or encumbrance of the real property shall be valid without the joint, notarized, physically present signatures of both partners, with each signature witnessed by a disinterested third-party notary. The language was a brick wall. It clouded the chain of title in a way no title company could ignore, as long as someone knew it was there. I traced my finger over Ben's notary signature at the bottom, the familiar swoop he'd practiced on scrap paper while watching the evening news, and I whispered, "Oh, Ben, you brilliant dying man." Then I found the fraudulent chain. Peter had formed a new entity called Redwood Hills Wines LLC and filed it with the California Secretary of State. The LLC's operating agreement listed him as the sole member manager, but the original formation form, the Statement of Information, contained my forged signature as a co-manager, supposedly acknowledging my consent to transfer my partnership interest into the new entity. He then executed a quitclaim deed transferring the vineyard from our original partnership to the new LLC, and that deed's notary block carried the same bogus commission number, NPA 22,477. 2 weeks later, Redwood Hills Wines LLC deeded the entire estate to Corpus Vintners, a Delaware corporation, for a recorded consideration of $1,200,000. The grant deed was flawless on its face, properly recorded, but attached as an exhibit was the fraudulent release of partnership interest, the same one I now held in my cottage. The sale had been consummated and the deed recorded, but the memorandum still lay in the chain like a loose thread. If I could prove the release was a forgery and demonstrate that the notary stamp was synthetic, the entire transaction would be void ab initio, legally erased as if it had never happened. I photocopied every single page, created a parallel document binder of my own, and then I cross-referenced the commission number. The NPA 22,477 record appeared in the Secretary of State's online database, but the listing was flagged. Surrendered due to incomplete journal records, 2021. The notary of record was a woman named Alina Vance, and a quick obituary search revealed she had died of a stroke in 2022, at age 71, in a Lake County assisted living facility. She could not have stamped anything in Napa in 2024. The seal affixed to Peter's documents did not match the genuine digital image on file with the state. The genuine seal had a slightly different serration count and a raised rim that this copy lacked. Someone had used a $60 online custom stamp service that generated a PNG image of a fake seal, then printed it directly onto the page. I needed an ally who understood the commercial underwriting side, someone who could translate my forensic title findings into a legal strategy that would freeze the sale before Corpus Vintners could argue they were bona fide purchasers for value without notice. I called my old supervisor at the recorder's office, a man named Gerald who had trained me on title plant mapping in the 90s, and I asked him to introduce me to someone at the title insurance company that underwrote these kinds of high-dollar vineyard acquisitions. Gerald put me in touch with the chief compliance officer at Fidelity National Title, a woman named Sandra Okonkwo, a forensic title examiner who specialized in synthetic identity fraud and had a reputation for cooperating with the FBI on real estate schemes exceeding the bank fraud threshold. I met her at a diner off Highway 101, a place that smelled of fryer oil and desperation, and over 2 cups of burnt coffee, I laid out the documents one by one. Sandra was a tall Nigerian-American woman with close-cropped gray hair and the stillness of a civil litigator. She studied the forged notary stamps under a jeweler's loop she carried in her purse, then compared my genuine signature from the original partnership agreement to the forgeries on the release and the LLC forms. She noted that the imposter notary's commission number was technically valid but revoked, and she explained a concept called synthetic notarization, where a criminal generates a seal using a real notary's credentials without the notary's knowledge, often after that notary is deceased, and the commission can't be verified in person. The title policy is voidable for fraud, Sandra said, her voice quiet but iron-hard. Corpus Vintners' risk manager will pull out the moment I file a suspicious activity report with FinCEN. But to make it stick criminally, I need the original forged LLC formation packet from Peter's office. That's the smoking gun that proves he commissioned the fake seal and knew the notary was dead. Do you think you can get it? I told her I could, and I asked her to coordinate with the Sonoma County District Attorney's office so that we could time the confrontation inside the title company's own conference room, where every signature would be witnessed. That same week, I staged the maximum cruelty beat. I needed to test whether Peter still possessed a single scrap of humanity, and I needed a cover to access his home office while he was out. I decided to orchestrate a fake medical collapse, something dramatic enough to trigger his real instincts, but safe enough that I could control the outcome. I'd been a volunteer EMT for 2 years in my 20s, in a rural fire district north of Healdsburg, so I knew how to feign a syncopal episode. Drop limp like a sack of potatoes, keep the eyelids fluttering slightly to simulate unconsciousness, maintain shallow breathing but not too deep. I even practiced the collapse twice in my cottage, onto a pile of laundry, to make sure I wouldn't hurt myself on impact. On a Saturday morning, while Tanya was at a yoga class in Healdsburg, I walked to the main house carrying the black folder that Peter believed held the original partnership agreement and Ben's note. Only I had swapped the contents that morning with a high-quality color photocopy that I'd made at the FedEx office on 4th Street, using their heaviest bond paper to feel authentic. I sat on the leather sofa in the living room, clutching the folder to my chest, and waited until I heard Peter's footsteps on the stairs. As he rounded the corner, I let my body slide sideways, thudding heavily onto the hardwood floor, my eyes closed, my breath so shallow it barely fogged the air. I didn't move. I didn't twitch. I lay there as still as Ben had lain in his final hour. Peter stopped. He said my name once, then a second time, louder. I heard his shoes cross the floor, but he didn't kneel beside my head to check my pulse. He didn't tilt my chin to open my airway. He knelt next to the folder. I felt his fingers prying my hands open, his knuckles brushing my skin as he extracted the document packet, and I heard a soft, satisfied grunt as he saw what he believed was the notarized original. He stood up, stepped directly over my body, 1 foot landing inches from my outstretched fingers, and walked into the kitchen. I heard him dial his phone, and I heard his voice, low and steady, as he said to Tanya, "Sarah's unconscious on the floor, but the original is here. I'm shredding it right now. You get to the title company and tell them we'll have her signature by Monday, before she's even back on her feet. We just need her alive enough to hold a pen." Then the shredder motor began to whir. I lay there, listening to the blades chew up the photocopies, and some last remaining warmth I'd held for Peter, some residual loyalty to Ben's memory, extinguished like a candle in a vacuum. I let my eyes open a slit once his footsteps retreated to his office at the back of the house. I crawled silently to the shredder bin, and sure enough, the fake original was confetti. But my phone's voice memo app had been recording in my pocket the entire time. Peter had just confessed to fraud and elder abuse while leaving me for dead on the floor. I had everything. While Peter drove to the title company to pressure the escrow agent, I used my old trade skill literally. I'd kept a small tension wrench and a standard hook pick in my wallet for years, a leftover from the abandoned parcel days when I'd needed to open rusted gate locks that hadn't been turned in a decade. Peter's office door had a brandless quickset knob, a standard 5-pin tumbler, the kind you can rake in under 2 minutes if the pins aren't security spooled. I slid the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied gentle clockwise torque until I felt the first pin bind, then raked the hook across all 5 pins, back and forth, until I heard each pin click into place. The lock surrendered in 94 seconds, I counted. The filing cabinet inside was also locked, but the key lay in the pencil drawer beneath a stapler, because Peter was that arrogant. I found the original unsigned LLC formation packet with my forged signature on the member acceptance page, along with a folder of email correspondence with a domain called notarystampexpress.net. The order confirmation, dated 3 days after Ben's funeral, requested a custom rubber stamp with the text, Eleanor Vance, Notary Public, Lake County, NPA 22477, and included a PDF proof of the seal image. The billing address was Peter's personal credit card. I photographed every page with my phone, tucked the LLC packet into my waistband, and slipped back to the casita without leaving a trace. The confrontation came 3 days later, at the Healdsburg branch of Fidelity National Title. Peter had told me we were going to finalize a small corrective deed to clean up some lingering estate paperwork, and that I just needed to sign a single page. He drove me himself, Tanya in the back seat wearing a coral blazer and the rigid smile of someone counting money in her head. The conference room held a long walnut table, a certified notary public, the escrow officer who'd been handling the corpus sale, and at my request through Sandra, 2 observers from the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office, a fraud investigator named Detective Munoz and a Deputy D.A. named M.S. Akata sitting unobtrusively in the corner chairs. Peter thought they were junior title clerks. He slid a single sheet across the table, a half-page form titled corrective release of memorandum of partnership. It was designed to cancel the memorandum on file, allowing the corpus sale to proceed unclouded. As he handed me a pen, I set down my own folder, the one with Ben's note visible on top. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice calm, "I'd like to see the original partnership agreement that the memorandum references. You still have it, right?" Peter's jaw tightened until a muscle in his temple jumped. He produced the forged release of partnership interest instead, believing it was sufficient. I lifted the page, angled it toward the fluorescent light, and turned to the notary. "Madam Notary, would you please call the Secretary of State's database and verify commission number NPA 22477, which appears on this release and on the quitclaim deed recorded 3 weeks ago?" She had been pre-briefed by Sandra. She typed into her laptop, her face a careful blank, and after a 10-second pause she said, "That commission was surrendered in 2021, and the notary of record, Alina Vance, is deceased as of 2022. The seal affixed to this document does not match the state's digital registry in its rim radius, serration count, or authorized image file metadata. This is a synthetic notarization." The silence in the room was crystalline, the kind that follows a gunshot. I then handed the escrow officer my original partnership agreement, the one still bearing my true signature and Ben's genuine notary stamp. "Peter," I said, "your father saw this coming. He recorded a memorandum that can't be wiped without my voluntary, physically present signature, witnessed by a disinterested notary. I am not signing anything today except an affidavit for the district attorney." I set my phone on the table, the audio file of his shredder confession cued and ready. "I have a recording of you stepping over my unconscious body 3 days ago and saying you just need me alive enough to hold a pen. That, combined with the forged notary stamp you manufactured using a deceased woman's commission, the falsified LLC formation documents I removed from your office, and the email chain where you ordered the stamp from notarystampexpress.net using your personal credit card, meets every element of forgery, financial elder abuse, and fraudulent conveyance under California Penal Code sections 470, 368, and Civil Code 3439. Peter lunged for the phone, but Detective Munoz was already on his feet and had a firm hand on Peter's shoulder. "Sonoma County Sheriff is en route to process your arrest," he said evenly. Tanya started screaming about entrapment and civil rights, but Peter just stared at the forged release as if the ink had turned to acid. Within the hour, Peter was arrested on 3 felony counts: forgery of a notarized signature, fraudulent conveyance of real property, and financial elder abuse, because I was over 65 and thus fell under the Enhanced Protection Statute. The entire sale was frozen by a temporary restraining order before the escrow could close. Corpus Vintners, through their legal counsel, issued a formal rescission notice the next morning and withdrew their purchase agreement, citing material fraud in the title chain and a pending suspicious activity report with FinCEN that could affect their own liability. I filed a civil suit in Sonoma County Superior Court, seeking to void the deed and quiet title to my 40% interest, and the judge granted summary adjudication in 6 weeks because the forgery was so clear-cut that no reasonable trier of fact could rule otherwise. The memorandum was declared valid and binding, the forged release was expunged from the public record, and the vineyard reverted to the original partnership ownership structure. But the court didn't stop there. In a subsequent partition action, it found that Peter's breach of fiduciary duty was so egregious. He'd attempted to sell the entire asset out from under a protected partner and then step over her body, that it ordered a forced sale of his 60% interest at a judicially appraised value of $480,000, representing the damages I'd suffered from the attempted theft, the clouded title, and the emotional distress of being left for dead. Peter, already bankrupted by defense attorneys, restitution costs, and the voided sale, couldn't come up with a dime. The judgment converted into a sheriff's deed that vested the entire estate in my name alone, free and clear, 19 days before the vintage harvest. The aftermath was not loud. It wasn't a courtroom drama with slamming gavels. It was a slow, procedural unwinding that left Peter exposed to the bones. He was convicted of forgery and elder abuse and sentenced to 5 years of formal probation with 1,000 hours of community service. At my victim impact statement, I read Ben's note aloud in open court. Do not trust Peter. He's already tried to sell the vineyard without you. The original is your anchor. Keep it safe. The sentencing judge, a woman with tired eyes and a low tolerance for legal gamesmanship, added a creative restitution rider. She ordered that Peter must perform half of his community service hours at the vineyard, under my supervision, wearing a high-visibility safety vest that reads, "Crushed by Justice," in reflective block letters across the back. He prunes the old vine Zinfandel 6 hours a week, his sunburned neck bent over the very rootstock he tried to steal, while tasting room visitors sometimes take photos from the deck. Tanya filed for divorce within a month of his arrest, citing irreconcilable differences, and she moved to Scottsdale to marry a real estate developer she'd apparently been seeing for a year. Peter's Instagram vanished overnight. The last post, still cached, showed him toasting a bottle at a release party with a caption that read to the grind. I imagine he didn't realize how literal that would become. Corpus Vintners, facing a public relations nightmare, settled with me privately for a low 6-figure sum, $145,000, to avoid negative press in the wine industry journals, and they signed a long-term grape purchasing contract that keeps the vineyard profitable without any outside debt. I renamed the estate Grapes of Wrath Vineyard, and the flagship Zinfandel, which had already won a regional gold medal under Peter, I rebranded as Ben's Resolve. The back label tells the story, in miniature, of a quiet man who filed a memorandum before he died, and I wrote the tasting notes in a voice that is equal parts soil minerality and legal certainty. $5 from every bottle sold goes to a nonprofit I co-founded with Sandra Okonkwo called Ink and Integrity. It monitors notary fraud by scraping the Secretary of State's database for unusual patterns, provides free training for county title examiners on forged signature detection using digital overlay software, and maintains a public database of revoked and suspended notary commissions that title companies now use to flag synthetic stamps before they infect a chain of title. Last year alone, Ink and Integrity's referrals led to 14 criminal prosecutions of real estate forgery in California, including a ring in San Diego that had defrauded 12 homeowners out of their deeds using the same $60 sealmaker method, and a dead notary whose commission hadn't been formally revoked. We now have a full-time forensic examiner on staff, funded entirely by the vineyard's charitable contributions. What I learned, in the end, is that the best revenge is to let the law do its own meticulous, quiet pruning. I didn't need to scream or swing a figurative hammer. I just needed to understand the chain of title and to trust the man who, even while dying, had seen the cracks in his own son's integrity and had planted a dead hand that reached from the grave to keep me safe. Some family trees need to be pruned so the rootstock doesn't rot, and sometimes the shears are just a county recorder's stamp, a tension wrench, and a widow who refused to sign. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and hit that bell, because around here, we believe that justice is the quietest weapon. I'll see you in the next one.